Hello viewer, in part 1 of the video program, you have understood the concept of review of related literature and you are clear that review of related literature involves identification, evaluation and synthesis of the work related to the topic which you have selected. And you have also seen the purposes which are served by the review of related literature, and it is very clear that at every stage the review of related literature helps the researcher in crystallizing the ideas. In this video program, you will be able to, not you, दोबारा चल रही हैं? हाँ जी, इत्थों शुरू करेंगे. In this video program, I'll try to answer another two questions, that is there any problem with the existing way of carrying out or presenting review of related literature, and what is the systematic process of carrying out review of related literature. So certain guidelines are likely to be presented how to go about writing systematic review of related literature. There are 4 stages when you undertake review of related literature as stated by Gay et al. 2007. The very first step in undertaking systematic review of related literature is to identify the key words that will guide your search of the literature. When I say the key words, maybe I am referring to the variables which are pertinent in the topic which you have selected. Say for example, I am concerned with emotional intelligence and the stress among the teachers working in technical institutions. Now here you see emotional intelligence is one variable, stress is another variable, and teachers working in technical institution, maybe teachers is one variable and technical institution is another variable. So when you are looking up for the literature, you can take up emotional intelligence of teachers. You can take up stress among teachers. Then you can add another component of technical institution while finding related studies from the available sources of information. Identifying sources of information is the second step, because there are 3 different types of sources of information. You have preliminary sources of information where you talk about dictionary, thesaurus, annotated bibliography or bibliography. So you can think of, or you have indexes where you can see what kind of information is available, and then you have primary source of information where the researcher himself has produced the research report. For example, the thesis or the dissertations taken at various levels, or a journal article contributed by a person who has undertaken the study in the journal. Then you have secondary sources of information. Say for example, a thesis written by an individual contains a chapter on review of related literature, and it includes about 50 to 60 studies which have already been carried out in the field, and you try to draw some information from that. For you, those studies become as secondary sources of information. Or when you say somebody has written a conceptual paper for the conference, then it is a secondary information which you are trying to tap from the source of information. And the third step in review of related literature is abstracting the information found in the references. So once you take up a study which you think is relevant to the research being undertaken. You try to go through the article and skim the relevant information, prepare an abstract out of that information. So you are trying to analyze the information and organize it. And once you collect information related to number of studies, you are at the end trying to synthesize or collate the information gathered from the various sources of information related to different studies to be included in the review of related literature. And here are some of the guidelines which you should take into consideration while preparing and writing your review of related literature. One of the drawbacks that one can observe in the existing system, how review is represented in the thesis or the dissertation or in the journal articles, one finds that most of the review of related literature is presented in the chronological order. A study conducted in 85, another study conducted in 87, another conducted in 91, 95, 2001, and so on. A person does not like to relate one study with the another. So, what is it that should be the approach of a good researcher? Because it requires synthesis of the related literature, and that's an important phase in the review of related literature. So, one can classify studies on the basis of the findings. For example, if you are dealing with correlation between emotional intelligence and job satisfaction. Now, clearly it shows it's a correlational study. R can be positive, R can be negative, or there can be no correlation between the emotional intelligence and job satisfaction. So, there can be significant positive correlation, significant negative correlation, or there can be not significant or insignificant positive or negative correlation. So once you are trying to gather the information you have gathered for different studies, now how you collate? You can collate the information with respect to its findings by clubbing all those studies which say there exists significant positive correlation between emotional intelligence and job satisfaction. Or if you have few studies which say there is significant negative correlation between the emotional intelligence and job satisfaction, this is how you synthesize the information. Or you can club studies which says there is no correlation between the emotional intelligence and job satisfaction. Let's see another example. When I say you are taking up a study which deals with differences in the achievement of students taught through different methods of instruction, maybe you are teaching one group with the lecture method and you allow the other group to do the independent study by self-learning modules. Now, if this kind of a study has been undertaken, then the outcome, the findings will be in terms of either there will be no differences in the achievement of the students taught through different methods, or there will be significant difference in the achievement of the students taught through two different methods. And you may come across that in some studies, students taught through lecture method, they show significantly higher mean gain score than the students taught through self-learning modules. Or you may come across studies which say students taught through self-learning modules show significantly higher mean gain score than the students taught through lecture method. Or you can be that differences exist, but these differences are not significant differences. They may be in favor of the students taught through lecture, or maybe in favor of students taught through self-learning modules. If these kinds of findings are there, they clearly point out that once you are trying to synthesize the information related to different studies, you can club those studies on the basis of the findings where the significant differences have been found, where not significant differences have been found, where the differences are in favor of the students taught through lecture method, or where the differences are in favor of the students taught through self-learning module. So if you go on chronologically presenting the data, the reader doesn't come to any conclusions. But once it is synthesized, collated, it is very easy to draw conclusions on the basis of the review of related literature. Another way how you can classify studies, that is on the basis of context. The context may be the country, the region, the level of education, and you can decide that if the studies have been conducted in the Indian context, and that too in the general education, you can collate all those studies. If the studies have been conducted abroad, international scenario is there, you can refer to all those international studies at one place, because there are differences in the context in which a particular study has been taken, and the context is likely to make some difference in the findings of study. Another is you can classify the students on the basis of some, sorry, 1 minute. 1 minute, 1 minute. ਇੱਥੇ ਗਲਤੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ, क्लासीफाई स्टडीज, ठीक है जी, चलो ये हुन तो और तो स्टार्ट कर रही हैं, हाँ जी. Or you can classify studies on the basis of sample for the studies. So the students, whether they are from the school level, college level, university level, or whether they are all the studies which have been conducted at class 9, or whether a first year students from the diploma level institution has been taken, or the studies have been carried out on the final year students of the diploma level institution. So maybe you are trying to organize the studies and come out with conclusion what is the finding at class 9, maybe at the first year of the diploma level institutions, and maybe the final year students of diploma level institution. This will clearly give you an indication whether the findings are similar for the students who are studying at different levels, or are there differences in the findings of the study. You can classify the studies on the basis of the treatment which has been given to the groups. Maybe when I took up an example of lecture method, self-learning modules, maybe the lecture method has been compared with many other methods of instruction. So you are trying to find out that the self-learning modules which you are developing, how they were similar to the previous studies which have taken up self-learning modules, how the self-learning modules were different from those with the studies which have already taken up self-learning modules. So maybe, or maybe the self-learning modules has been designed in the subject of physics, or maybe self-learning modules, they have been designed in the subject of applied physics, or maybe it is one of the subjects where theory of machines, that subject has been taken up and the person has tried to develop the self-learning modules. So you can see the commonality and the differences that exist in the treatment, and then you can try. Maybe the duration of the treatment also varies. A person who has only administered the treatment for say a week's time, 15 days, or maybe 1 month. So we can classify studies on the basis of a very short time treatment, a week's time or 15 days, and then the standard which is acceptable, a minimum of 1 week's treatment which has been given to the experimental group. And once you classify studies, within each classification, you can group the studies on the basis of the finding. So this one guideline must be kept in mind while you are presenting the review of related literature. This is another example where classify studies on the basis of variables. Now, for example, you have included three important variables in the study. One is intelligence of the student, another is the gender. You are including both boys and girls, and the third variable is achievement at entry level. Now, these are three important variables which form part of the research being undertaken. So, what a researcher is interested in, he is trying to find out maybe whether there are differences in the achievement at entry level on the basis of intelligence. That is, whether the students from high intelligence, they have high achievement score at entry level, or whether the students with average intelligence, they outperform the students of high intelligence with respect to achievement at entry level. Maybe these are the questions which you would like to find an answer to. So it becomes essential for a researcher that he tries to classify the studies on the basis of the important variables that have been selected and included in the research being undertaken. So you can classify the studies, maybe intelligence and achievement at entry level, another may be gender and achievement at entry level, and another could be intelligence and gender and achievement at entry level. So all those studies which have only taken up intelligence and achievement, they form one group. Gender and achievement they studied, they form another group. And all those studies which have taken all the three variables, they are clubbed and presented at one point of time. And then within each category, the same principle that you can classify the studies on the basis of the findings. Another drawback which one observes in the existing system of reporting review of related literature is many a times gaps exist in the review of related literature. When I say gaps exist, maybe a student who's trying to report the findings of the study in a chronological manner, he has one study which has been taken up in 65, another in 69, another in 75, another comes in 80, another comes in 90, and then comes in 95. Now you can see that there are gaps as far as the year is concerned. It cannot happen that during 85 to 95 or 80 to 95, there are no studies which have been undertaken. It may be a chance that a student doesn't come across a study which has been undertaken. And once these gaps exist in the review of related literature, it is difficult to come out with the conclusions, draw the valid conclusions from the review of related literature. So it is very important that once we are trying to carry out review of related literature, we first identify the keywords, and maybe those keywords relate to the variables which you have included in the study. As in the previous case, we have taken example of intelligence, gender, and achievement at entry level. So these become three important keywords for searching the various sources of information. And you can also think of whether a synonym exists for this particular word, whether the same word has been used in a different context, or maybe different word is used for this particular keyword. So one needs to look into the synonyms which are available in the literature for, say for example, achievement. People use achievement, people also makes use of the performance. So can we, achievement and performance, these go together? Or if we try to distinguish between the two, whether the studies have actually distinguished between the performance of the student and the achievement of the student, though there are differences. So you need to select several keywords and a combinations of them. Then you can broaden or narrow down your search, and you can adopt three principles of and, or not. When you use and, you broaden the search. If you use or, again, when you use and, कित्थे रुक गई मैं? हाँ जी, बोलिया की सीगा दसोगे?
When you use and you narrow down your
ओके ओके, हाँ इत्थे गलती की थी ना, चलो हाँ जी, when तो शुरू करा? ओके, चलो, when you use and not, then you narrow down your search, and when you use or, you broaden our search. Because when I'm using achievement or performance, it conveys the same thing to me. So all those studies which have been undertaken either by including a word achievement or a performance, they will be enlisted in the sources of information. Then narrowing and focusing by date of publication. Many of us have a myth that larger the review, better it is. It is not true. Once you take up a review of related literature, you can always delimit your review of related literature by saying that you are trying to review the related literature for the past 15 years. You can also be specific about the authors and titles if you have gathered information from the preliminary source and now you are searching a primary or a secondary source. You can use these keywords, that is specific author or a title of the study, to narrow down your search for literature. The sources of information are many. You can use dictionaries, you can use thesaurus, you can use indexes, you can use an encyclopedia, books, abstracts, research reports, theses, references given at the end of various journal articles or theses or otherwise, or you can use annotated bibliographies, journals, review in journals, compiled works, and collective work. So these are examples of preliminary, primary, and secondary sources of information. And you have also directory of open access journals which provide you access to 9,412 journals and 6,582 articles can be searched. And the information is available from 128 countries, and you have this number which is quite voluminous. Articles are available on this website. So you have access to the information in the digital world, and it is not very difficult for a person because all these are open access journals and you can fill in the gaps in your review by accessing the related journals. If you are trying to search the databases, each university now provides a database for the research which has been carried out at the university level. But the Indian government has started Shodh Ganga, which is a repository of all the research which has been carried out in India at the doctoral level, and you have access to, incomplete, you have access to the theses which have been carried out or undertaken by the researchers in various universities. If you are interested in getting information with respect to the national policies, maybe accreditation, so you have National Board of Accreditation website which is available. You have All India Council for Technical Education website which provides you access to the technical education, and you have above all a site which is available, that is MHRD, Government of India, where you can refer to the resources available. You can also have an access to the reports which are published by MHRD. You can access the directives given, and you can also see how the initiatives are taken by the Government of India in various levels of education, maybe school education, that too at elementary, secondary, and senior secondary, and then maybe at the diploma level, ITI level, or you have the IITs, IIMs. What kind of initiatives are being taken by the Government of India to increase the access, improve the quality, and also build excellence within the system? This is again AICT site which has been modified, and it is very, very important that once you start with your search for the review of related literature, you search through preliminary sources. Preliminary sources, now when I say look to the meaning, go to the thesaurus, then you are getting synonyms of the word which can be used. So you can either narrow down or broaden your search by using the synonyms. So when you use and, you are narrowing down. Then try to search both primary and secondary sources of information. And these days, you have access to the print material as well as the online material. So digital content is available, many of the journals. As I said, you have directory of open source, journals of open sources. So you can refer to that and gather related information. In addition, it is important that you don't only restrict yourself to the library which is accessible to you, but you visit as many libraries which are accessible in your region and your country, and make sure that there are no gaps in the literature which is surveyed. Another drawback which we come across in the review of related literature is that once a student or researcher is reporting a research study already taken up, the information varies from one study to another. And there are gaps in the way the information is presented. So, what needs to be done? First is decide what information you require to write a review of related literature. Maybe you zero down that you will try to, once you are preparing an abstract of the information, and it is a request that the abstract given on the journal or otherwise should not be copied as such. So you decide whether you are going to include the objectives, hypothesis, design, sample, tools, and the major findings, along with suggestions for further research. So once you set up a criteria, how you are going, what information you are going to include, all studies where you prepare an abstract should provide you this information. It will be easy to collate the information. So you adopt similar pattern for writing review for different studies, and while you are writing, make sure that you only use standard abbreviations and do not coin your own abbreviations which you will not be able to discern after 1 month or 2 months. So that will create problems for you. So anything which needs to be reproduced in your thesis or dissertation or in your article, that needs to be recorded in exactly the same words as given in the source of information, and that has to be in inverted commas so direct quotes can be picked up. Make sure that while you are writing incomplete, is accurate, it's explicit, and conveys your attention clearly to the person who is reading and conveys clearly the findings, the design in the correct perspective as was done by the original researcher, and you logically present. So there is coherence among the studies which are presented in the review of related literature, and you need to be brief. It cannot be that you can run into pages and include the findings of one particular study. Another drawback sometimes we come across is that the review of related literature is presented in the present tense. The researcher finds, the study finds, and so on. Now, once we are saying this is the record of what has been done in the past, it is very important that when we start writing the review of related literature, it is in the past tense and not in the present tense. Then, major drawback, once you present the review of related literature, there are no conclusions drawn at the end of the review of related literature, and there is abrupt end. The person has written intelligence and achievement and entry level. Given the synthesis of that information, then goes to gender and achievement at entry level, and then goes to intelligence, gender, and achievement at entry level. But what is it that is more important is that the researcher tries to draw conclusions. So, once you have synthesized, it is very easy to come out with major conclusion. Whether majority of the studies say that there is significant positive correlation between achievement at the entry level and the intelligence level of the individual, or whether majority of the studies say there is positive correlation but not significant. So, likewise, you come out with conclusions which directly tries to provide an answer to your objectives, and you are able to formulate hypothesis, the tentative, educated guesses for the solution to the problem which you have formulated. So, it is important that you draw conclusions, and classification may be taken into consideration, and you also identify the gaps in research, because the review of related literature helps you in identifying the need for further research, and they say these are the gaps and this is where further research can be undertaken. Or when you try to screen the review of related literature, you may come out with that most of the studies have been done in one context but not in another context. So maybe that is a conclusion you draw, and you are able to identify the need for taking up a study in a particular context on a particular sample with particular variables and so on. So another is that once you provide this review of related literature and you draw conclusion, they help you in strengthening or building the rationale for the study, and you justify why study is required in this particular area. So these are some of the suggestions with respect to how to go about drawing conclusions about the review of related from the review of related literature. And one last word, that is bigger doesn't mean better. So, this is a myth that larger the review of related literature, better is. So, I have already made this point that delimit the period. You say you are going to review for the past 15 years, 20 years, or 25 years, because what is the status today, that is more important in the light of the past work, and you try to build a gap, bridge the gap between the study which you are going to take up and what has already been done. You can delimit the context, that you will be delimiting or restricting your study only to the sample from the colleges of education or technical institutions from the state of Haryana or Punjab or Delhi, or maybe you can say Tri-City, that is Chandigarh, Panchkula and Mohali. Then you can focus on meta-analytical studies if large number of research studies have been undertaken in the area which you have selected for your research. And lastly, if the area has not been researched, then few studies are available. So whatever related studies you come across, you try to include in your review of related literature. And bibliography and references, once you are recording data, then it is very important that you also record the bibliographic information, and that has to be done in taking into consideration the American Psychological Association guidelines for writing reference or a bibliographic information for a book, journal, direct quote, indirect quote, and so on. So I'm not going to dwell on those. The site apa.org is available. You can refer to that site and see the latest manual which is available. Make sure from wherever you collect the information and whatever information you include in your review of related literature, that is acknowledged. So these are some of the guidelines which need to be taken into consideration while writing the review of related literature for the research being undertaken. So thank you.